In this video, I'll give you some tips for creating your multi-genre project for your 200 level literature course. Um, so I thought the best way to kind of structure this presentation would be to answer some frequently asked questions I get about the project in order to teach you a little bit more about what it is exactly I'm expecting. I do want to preface that by saying that everyone's project is going to look different. So even if you look at the samples, even if I show you what some other students have done, keep in mind that yours might look different. There are a few things, though, that they have in common. And one of the first is that they all make some sort of literary argument. When I say the word argument, students usually think automatically of like pro-con list. And they're like, how am I going to make an argument about a piece of literature? Well, anytime you're making a statement about what something means or what an author might have wanted the audience to take away from a piece, that means you're making an argument, okay? The beginning of a poem, the writer doesn't say, before you read this, I want you to know this poem means this. Meaning is derived from the reader. And so what you need to do when you're looking at your project is think of a concept or an idea that you've hopefully focused on by now about that project and give evidence to prove that the concept or idea you have is the right concept or idea. So take a stand when it comes to interpreting the literature. So you're going to be interpreting the literature, and that is what's going to make your argument. Another question I often get is, what do you mean by teach an argument? How can someone do that? Well, it's really not as complicated as you think, and perhaps that's another piece of advice I could give you. Don't overcomplicate this assignment. If you follow the directions and interpret them to the best of your ability, you should be on the right track with the assignment, okay? What I mean by teach an argument is you're explaining why you have that viewpoint about a particular text. And that explanation is the teaching part. And when you're making an assertion about a text, you should be using an authoritative voice, which in this case will be supported by research that you found on that topic or idea. And you should try and explain why you believe this certain thing about an aspect of the text that you're reading and how you see it in the text by using specific quotes from the text or specific paraphrased examples from the text. And the teaching part also includes filling in context and concepts. If you are studying something about class and you are exploring women's roles in society in your literary argument, you're going to have to do the research to fill in the gaps for other students who might have picked a different topic and they don't understand some of the issues in that topic. So that might mean explaining a particular concept or filling in some background context. For instance, if you're talking about the education of women, depending upon their class, you might have to give us some information on how women were educated at that time period and what evidence you see in the text that points to that historical context in terms of the education of women. So when you're teaching an argument, it's simply that you're explaining how you and why you got to the conclusion that you drew on the text. And your professors, when they're teaching you about the meaning of something, that's what they're essentially doing, because there aren't really right or wrong answers when it comes to interpreting literature. There's a lot of gray, and you have to kind of get used to sticking into the parts of which there are gray. You have to kind of get used to understanding that there are parts of things that sometimes have a little bit of gray meaning. It's not always black or white. So remember, there isn't always a black and white answer when you're talking about an argument in literature. There's a lot of gray areas, and you have to find your own voice in that gray area. And I know that that can be difficult for a variety of reasons. One being, you might have had people in the past tell you, well, that's not what it means this. Well, they have more authority, and so you believe them. But if you can show your classmates in your presentation your evidence and your authority over the information, and you can explain why and how you came to those conclusions using good, reliable sources and your own voice, filling in the context and the concepts, then you aren't going to really be quote unquote wrong. So another question I get is about how you use research. So you're going to be able to use a variety of different resources, and I'll talk a little bit about those resources in a second. Of course, you've already been learning about some of those resources in the components of the project, but the ways in which you're going to be using the research is to support your claims. So you might find an article that agrees with your statement about the text, and you could use that to support your claim. You might also gather evidence about the text and come up to a conclusion that is not supported in the critical arguments that you read. And so you might note some inconsistencies, and that's okay. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything that you read, as long as you can point out those inconsistencies and explain them by backing it up with your own evidence. And that could be evidence from the text or evidence from other sources. Remember, those critical articles are written by people who have opinions. People are fallible. If you see an inconsistency and it doesn't fit with your viewpoint, if you can explain how and why, then you're going to be doing the right thing by supporting your claim. Okay? You might also use the research to fill in historical background and context about the topic that your audience might not know about because you've gone a little more in depth on your topic. And so you can use that kind of background to support your project. And also you can use research to explain terms and ideas. I find sometimes that short video clips are really good at exploring ideas and terms because those usually reach an audience really well. So the types of sources that you can use, you're going to have around 5 to 8 sources, and they can come from a variety of different genres. And that is one of the advantages over doing a multimedia presentation versus doing just a traditional paper, is that you can utilize a variety of different good academic sources that aren't just limited to text-based sources. So sure, you can still use those text-based, and you should use a text-based critical argument to support your claims. You can also use the text itself and maybe information you found in the textbook. But you can also incorporate more dynamic types of sources like images from academic websites or ideas from an academic website or a clip from a film or images themselves. So you should have a variety of different sources so that you can add some dimension to your project. And that's what makes it, I think, better than the regular traditional written text, which of course has its advantages, but being able to add another dimension to the project can help you prove your argument, and that's why a variety of genres of sources will work well for this project. So, do you have to cite in text in the body of your project? Yes. You should always provide an in-text citation anytime you put in a direct quote, a paraphrase, or a summary of a source, okay? Now, if you embed a video clip, you don't have to put the in-text citation into the project because that would just look funky, but you should put a citation in a works cited page for that video. And just a tip, put a works cited page somewhere at the end of your project. Also, if you use images, you don't have to put a works citation at the end of the image. Just make sure you have a citation for that image in the end of your project. But anytime you use a text-based source, you need to provide an in-text citation. So let me show you some examples of that. So the ways in which you should cite in your project are for things like a direct quote. For instance, if you said, according to the Longman Anthology, quote, this reading is difficult to understand, close quote, you would simply insert your author's last name and the page number at the end of the direct quote. The same for critical articles. If you are struggling to find an author's last name, an author's name and a title for your resource, it might not be the most academic of sources. Academics typically are pretty vain. They want people to give them credit for their work, and so when they publish their work, they attach their name to it. So that can be your first tip when you're evaluating sources, is that if it doesn't have an author's name and it doesn't have a title, it might not be academic. There are, of course, some few exceptions to that, and if you have any questions about whether your source is a good source or not, just ask me and I can help you. Next, you should cite anytime you have a paraphrase. An example of that might be something like the Longman Anthology mentions in a few sections how difficult it is to read British texts. And you can see I put the author's last name and the page numbers that encompass that paraphrase. Or perhaps you summarize something from a library website. The British Library explains that women were often educated in ways that were different from men during this time period. Domestic education was more of a focus than more scholarly pursuits. And you can see this didn't have an author because it was edited generally by the British Library, so I just put the title of the web page, and that will correspond with the first portion of my works cited page, and that title was Education in the 1900s. Do I have to cite every image? Technically, yes. Technically, anytime you take an image from the web, you should cite it because there is someone that created it out there. The internet didn't spontaneously generate images. However, in the interest of saving yourself some time, I'm not going to require that if you get something from Wiki Commons or some sort of clip art that you provide a citation. However, if you get images from things like the British Library or even Google image search, make sure you click through and see which web page it came from and give credit for the image. There's two reasons why. One, so that the person that created it gets the credit for creating it, and the second, sometimes you guys find really awesome images and I might want to use them next time, and I'd like to know where you got them. So cite your images, especially those really historical images. But if you have something from a Wiki Commons website or clip art, it's okay if you don't cite those. Though I do want to make clear that I feel that way about it, but you might have other professors that want you to cite every single image, because technically, yes, you are supposed to cite every image. I'm just not being that exacting when it comes to your images. So here are some final style tips. First, don't put too much text on the slides. If you'll notice in this presentation, I've relied on my delivery to give you the information and only put a few things on the slides to not overwhelm you as you're trying to listen. If you put too much text on a slide, then students tend to just read the slide instead of listen to what you're saying. So your delivery is going to be really key here. Also, when you're choosing how you create your design, consider your audience. Your audience is going to be a group of college students, so think of what appeals to their sense of ethos, pathos, and logos, some terms you might have learned in English 101 and 102. Think of the things that will grab their attention and they want. want to learn more about your topic. Remember your purpose. Don't get too off topic or off on a tangent. You should have a strong thesis statement that keeps you organized, and make sure that you're going back to that idea and that purpose as you're delivering your presentation. I will include a few samples for you to look at that you can see, but I want to make clear about the samples. These are how students have interpreted the assignment. And so you'll notice that a lot of them look really different. And they also come from a variety of different classes. Because it's really what I want you to pay attention is not necessarily the subject matter, but how they created the project and the different ways in which they styled their project. So just make sure that if you have a strong delivery and you don't put too much information on the slides, you're considering your audience and purpose, you have a strong organization and thesis, you use good quality research, then you will be proving your argument. If you have any further questions about the project, or if I've left a question out that you've been having, please let us know in the questions and comments forum, and I will try to help you as you build your project. Best of luck, and I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with.